He's a distant individual with a big beard who no one ever sees. He is irrelevant to the vast majority of our lives, except when we want things, and then we might send in a request. He may reward us if we're good, which is why he's making a list and checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and nice. And while we seem to know next to nothing about him, he is apparently conducting round-the-clock surveillance of our lives. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows if you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. And when you think rationally about this person for more than 5 seconds, you must conclude that he is a deeply creepy individual, and you are not even for a moment tempted to believe in him. That's, of course, how most people view God. Most people see God as a kind of Santa in the sky, a distant figure, an impersonal moralist, an utter irrelevance to our lives. But clearly, Christians have seen something different in Jesus, or we wouldn't believe in him. You see, everyone stops believing in Santa when they grow up and examine the facts. But millions of people around the world start believing in Jesus when they grow up and examine the facts. That's because Jesus is very different to Santa. He is the God who has actually shown up in time and space and can be investigated. And I recommend that you do that. Pick up a biography of Jesus, a gospel, and start reading. But as you do, you'll encounter a God who is the very opposite of Santa. Here is the God who doesn't give presents, he gives himself. He doesn't reward the good, he draws near to the broken. Jesus is the God you can believe in.
LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, welcome to the show. LIVEcast, welcome to the LIVEcast, welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show!
Hello, welcome to the LIVEcast.
Hey!
It's good to have you with us.
Yes, as we lay into Santa, every year. It's just, it's Christmas.
Absolutely.
When Glen starts ranting about Santa.
We're not covering any controversial topics today at all.
Yeah.
Father Christmas and Brexit. So.
Yeah. I was doing a carol service recently and someone said, "You're not going to do your Santa thing, are you? Because there might be children here." I'm like, "It's all right. I'm not going to say he doesn't exist. I'm just going to say he's a monstrous legalist." That's all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Did you get some? Was it 4 Kinds of Christmas? There's a bit where you say like the kids are naive or something.
Yes, the kids are naive.
Yeah.
I do believe or something. Yeah. I see through the curtain.
We played that in our carol service that year, and I think it had. I can't remember. I think we had discussion about it beforehand, and we were like, "No, the kids aren't gonna. No one's gonna notice." So like,
but they probably did,
and we destroyed their views of Christmas. But
yeah, okay. So but then it's good news because the monstrous legalist doesn't exist. He's not there. But Jesus is different. So it's funny. So Premier Christian Radio, they did an interview with me 1 year ago, and I did an hour-long conversation with Sam Hales, and they clipped 90 seconds out of that video and turned it into What's the Gospel in 90 Seconds.
Yeah, and which we've done the animation for, yeah?
Which we've done the animation for. You should check out the animation. It's great because it doesn't have my face. But it's, it did really well. And then they decided, well, let's get Glen to do 90 seconds on lots of things. So stay tuned over the next year. They'll be releasing a whole bunch of videos.
Oh, okay. So it's quite a lot out of an hour. Quite a lot.
Well, no, I went back. And
so
then they
said,
said,
I see, yeah.
Literally they said, can you do the question of suffering in 90 seconds?
I was going to say, it's amazing that you answered so many questions in the space of 90 seconds, every time. It's a skill.
What a coinky dink. But, so I went up. And what was the last one? Oh, yeah, is Jesus a myth?
Yeah.
So I did that. They released that one like a month ago.
Not long ago, yeah, I remember that one
and
coming
then
up.
This is the latest one about is God just Santa for grown-ups? And what's interesting is that, it gets posted on like the Unbelievable Facebook page, which is an interesting Facebook page to be part of. I love the Unbelievable show. The Facebook page is feisty.
Yeah?
A lot of,
Imagine you get quite a lot of people who are just atheists who tune into things and want to chip in.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So this is what I say about Justin Briley. He's actually reaching non-Christians in a way that few evangelists in our country are.
Yeah.
I think he actually, on a weekly basis, reaches more unbelievers than any other evangelist I can think of.
Yeah, well, and when we went to the Jerusalem Awards and, I had a chat with him for about 5 or 10 minutes, and I was saying, I'm amazed how many he gets really high-quality guests on, know. It's not like he's not just some random bloke getting, some guy from the church and, the atheist down the road. He's getting big names on, and so people want to see people like that. The atheists will tune in to see, their team, and the big thinkers, and the Christians will tune in for their big thinkers as well.
Yeah.
So it's I think he does a great job, and it's a really great show. Lots of good stuff going on. So
yeah, and it was the podcast that really is the reason for that, because it sort of sits on Premier Christian Radio and it goes out on a Saturday afternoon, but by far the largest audience is this international audience that podcasting creates, and and they're doing really exciting stuff with the big conversations. So yeah, do check out the Unbelievable podcast. But so this Santa versus Jesus kind of 90 seconds got shared on that page, and it's just interesting. Like you try to address this issue. No, honestly, God's not just like Santa in the sky, and literally the comeback is nobody is.
he is, yeah,
nobody is. And you're like, well,
celestial North Korea, as Christopher Hitchens wants to say.
Yeah, no, exactly, and it kind of betrays a view of the God that many atheists don't believe in.
Yeah.
I think the God that many atheists don't believe in is an individual within the created order, far away, watching and waiting to, checking his list and
checking it twice.
Checking it twice.
Naughty and nice.
Yeah. And that is the God that they don't believe in. And you're like, well, welcome to the club.
Yep. Me neither.
Me neither. And then just pointing out stuff like, actually I've met countless people who are Christians now because, having become an adult, they've looked into the evidence and now they believe in God.
Yeah.
I've never met any adult who, having not believed in Santa during his childhood years,
came to believe in Santa.
Yep,
that's very fair. Yep.
That should be a really obvious asymmetry between God and Santa. But just the idea that God is a located individual within the created order is pretty much the God that most atheists I meet reject.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of like, no, like it's not as though God's like the Loch Ness Monster. It's not as though God's like the Abominable Snowman or Santa or the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Like, we exist to this God the same way that Hamlet exists to Shakespeare. And for Shakespeare, for Hamlet to say, yeah, but where is Shakespeare? I can't see him. You don't point to stage left.
Yeah.
No, there's this little corner. It's actually behind the scenes, back of stage left. That's where God is. You're like, no, we believe in something totally different. So anyway, we'll see if this little 90 seconds does some good in scattering the seed far and wide.
Yeah, sure, it will generate some discussion.
Yeah, actually that Santa versus Jesus video that we did. So I did. If you're not familiar, I've done 3 different versions of the anti-Santy ranty. There was the first one that we did that you played on the show a couple of weeks ago. That we recorded in church.
In the church.
Which is just, it's nice to watch that to see how far Speak Life has come. It's nice to see. Because that must have been like 2012 or something.
It's your first one, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah. I think in 2011 I did the King's English sort of video, but yeah, it was very homemade, that anti-Santy ranty to begin with, and then we did an animation, and then we did an updated version in about 2014. But having that 2014 version up my sleeve has been really helpful in lots of online conversations where people say, "Well, God's just Santa for grown-ups, isn't he?"
Yep. You can say no. Here you go. Have a look at this.
So if you check out speaklife.org.uk/festivals, you'll see the Santa versus Jesus video and lots of other content that can help you reach out this Christmas. That's speaklife.org.uk/festivals. So that's controversy number 1. Is it controversy or controversy? What do you say?
There was some controversy. Yeah, controversy.
Yeah, let's. Yeah. You take controversy. I'll take controversy.
Controversy.
Yeah, trust you to come up with a totally different.
Don't want to mispronounce it.
You're putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. So, having gone from the Santa controversy, we are now going to strap in. Put our helmets on.
Yeah, my word.
And dive into BREXIT.
Reading between the lines.
We're not going to do that.
That was my bad. I just clicked on the wrong thing.
So last night we released a video.
Yeah.
What was the video title?
10 questions to get beyond Brexit battles.
Yes.
Was the actual title, I think, in the end.
So questions, not answers.
No, we don't claim to have any answers. No, we have all the questions, but we've got literally nothing
to
respond with. No.
What would you say was the goal in releasing this video last night?
Well, I guess everyone's talking about Brexit.
Yep.
And we mentioned Brexit a few weeks ago
Yes.
in passing
Yes.
with a bit of our comedy hats on. Just,
Yes.
here are our thoughts on it. Tumbleweed
Yeah, crickets.
blows by.
Yeah, yeah.
And actually...
Which we thought was funny.
We were hilarious, quite frankly. And a number of people kind of said, please do have some thoughts on Brexit because everybody's talking about it
Yeah,
and
yeah.
stuff. And we say with our videos, don't we, that we want to do the water cooler moments,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
things what are people talking about. And even though people might be a bit fed up of it, everybody is talking about it. You can't get away from it. Mm-hmm. And, just like with any other subject we talk about from the news, we want to talk about it in a way that Christians can use it to therefore engage on a deeper level than just chatting about, the culture, but actually getting to Jesus. And so hopefully the questions in the Brexit video are there to say, well, rather than just, when we talk about Brexit going, oh, aren't we all fed up of this and having a moan, why don't we use those conversations productively to kind of probe a bit deeper into people's thoughts and things. So I think
That's
the aim,
really
isn't
interesting
it?
when you mention that, because in Philippians 2 verse 14 and 15 it says, do all things without complaining or arguing, and then you'll shine like a star in the universe. And it's in the context of holding out the word of life and pouring yourself out in mission. So it's this very evangelistic kind of method. And what's the evangelistic method? Don't complain or argue. Which is so difficult because, what is social media? Social media is...
It was designed for
my
complaining and arguing.
My
wasn't
Facebook
it?
post is a complaint. And then the comments, that's where you get the arguing, And so, the Apostle Paul in Philippians, in a letter all about joy and finding the secret of contentment in any and every circumstance, he's like, okay, if you resist complaining and arguing, then you will shine like a star in the universe. And I think that is interesting, that against the black backdrop of complaining and arguing, if you actually happen to be a person of peace, joy, and hope, when the backdrop is complaining and arguing, that's different. You'll stick out, but you won't just stick out like a sore thumb.
Which is interesting because so many people tend to think, don't they, that the default is we're all the ones who are peace and hope and lovely things, and then there's all these other people who are, that's the twist, that's the distortion.
Yes,
is the complaining and the moaning, but the reality is the complaining and the moaning is pretty much our default position, and then anything else is.
It is rich for Brexiteers to call Remainers Ramonas.
Yeah, absolutely,
and then to moan about it.
Yeah.
So how can we be different? How can we be those who, without complaining or arguing, actually shine like stars in the universe? Well, here are some suggestions. We're going to work our way through these 10 questions that we might want to start asking in a conversation. So should we have a look at the first couple?
Yeah.
Question 1. Are you optimistic about the future? So many Brexit conversations slide into questions of ultimate destiny and hope. On the one hand, people often have Martin Luther King Jr.'s view. The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. So they really believe in progress, and that maybe they're on the side of progress. They're on the right side of history. But where does that belief come from? If the world is a random flow of purposeless cause and effect, why do you think history is headed somewhere? I believe in Jesus, and his story shapes history. I think he'll come to bring about ultimate justice, but without Jesus, where do you ground your optimism?
Question 2. Are you pessimistic about the world?
I think you ought to know I'm feeling very depressed.
When Brexit comes up, hopelessness is not far away. Many people think the world is headed to hell in a handbasket. You'll find a lot of pessimism around when Brexit is mentioned. But again, we should ask, why? Where's the pessimism from? It might be really well founded, but it might also betray a view of the world that says things will only get worse and then you die. It might be an opportunity to talk about a greater hope.
So, that's the first couple of questions.
Yep.
Are about this sense of where does our moment now fit in the grander scheme of things. So, are you optimistic about the future because you think that, history is heading towards some, wonderful denouement? Or, whenever I'm lost for a word, I just reach for
some French.
It's certain I don't know. Dénouement et coup de théâtre. You think that life is heading towards this finale. It's all French. Save me from
with a baguette and
voulez-vous du beurre? Feu de fafa. Yes, you might think that history is heading somewhere good, or you might think that history is heading somewhere bad.
Yeah.
How do we engage people on those sorts of issues? What do you reckon about this sort of historical question?
Well, we were talking, weren't we, about sometimes whether we have a sense of perspective on stuff. We often think, don't we? I mean, I think if as a Christian, like we hopefully we've got a more eternal perspective, and we have a longer view in mind, or we should do. Yeah. And so the thing that's kind of struck me as we thought about what's going to happen next, and we'll come on to that maybe in a moment as well, is if it is very, very bleak, and the reality is that this will be what it's like for us for however long. Mm-hmm. It could very well be that we will just live, this generation or these few generations will live through a season of slump, mm-hmm. where quality of life isn't as good as it was. It's still going to be very good. Let's not be,
right,
blinded Westerners. Here we are.
Yeah,
It's also terrible.
Yes.
Caviar's run out.
Yes.
But hopefully, if we live through a period like this, you look back over history and say, well, there were people who lived through periods where life never got better.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But if you don't have a longer view, if you think life, this is just, this 70, 80 years is what you get and that's it, then you're going to be really miffed that,
right,
that this is happening.
Right.
And you're going to want to fight tooth and claw to make things better for you, for your life, to accumulate and get what you can.
Yes. Yeah. So with a shrunken sense of your horizon, like the here and now, really matters. And I mean, obviously economics matters and poverty matters. And if people are going backwards and slumping further into poverty, that's a real problem. We want to have all the compassion in the world for that. But if our horizon is literally just this generation, then economics becomes everything. And if our only horizon is this little blip, we won't actually look up from our little moment in time and space and realize that we're actually on top of an incredible mountain
hill.
Of privilege.
Yeah.
Right?
On World Mountain Day.
It is World Mountain Day. So, stay tuned next year for our seasonal video about mountains.
How can you use World Mountain Day to reach
for those
water
cooler moments? Wow. Jerusalem is like Mount Zion, surrounded by the hills.
Yeah. Where does
I lift my eyes to the hills.
My eyes to the hills.
Writes itself, people. Writes itself. So where was I? But
Send money to Patreon now.
Yeah, our crowdfunder for World Mountain Day is beginning. So if your horizon is just you and your generation, then not only are you going to fight tooth and claw for everything now, and not only you're not going to have a sense of the future, you're not going to have a sense of the past, and actually how much better you've had it than every other human being who's ever lived on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And so we collected together a few graphs to show people where we actually sit in terms of a few different metrics like violence.
So violence, here we go, that's homicide.
So starting in the year 1300.
Yep. So if you're listening on the podcast, we've got some diagrams up.
Yes.
And it basically shows how many homicides, was that annual homicides per 100,000 people?
Yeah.
And from the year...
Would you say the trend was up or down, Paul? What would you...
I'd say largely down.
I would say.
Largely down. Basically, you've got basically a drop off a cliff.
Yes.
As the homicide rate in Europe has been plummeting since the 1300s.
Yes. It does take a tiny little uptick at the end, but I think that's kind of 100 million violent deaths in the 20th century. I think that might be that might have been a problem.
That probably contributed.
Yeah.
Yeah. But on the whole, you got to look at that and say that's a positive.
Yeah.
change there.
Right. So the violence graph goes down, and then we've got an income graph.
GDP, yep. So look, yep, there we go, GDP.
So this is in England and the United Kingdom since about the same time, since 1270. And again, Paul, for those listening in, would you say that the income graph goes up or down?
Definitely goes up. And interestingly, I mean, you've got a very kind of gradual rise, haven't you?
Yeah.
Through all the way up until about 1800.
Yeah.
And then suddenly,
Industrial Revolution.
bang! It's like climbing a vertical face, isn't it? Almost.
Yeah.
Goes up and up and up and up and up.
It's a hockey stick, people. It's a hockey stick. So income up, and let's have a look at infant mortality.
Here we go. Infant mortality rate, so deaths under 1
So this is
year
just in the
per
last.
1,000.
This is since 1930. So sort of an infant mortality rate of in 1930 about 60.
Probably
deaths.
nearly up to 70 there, isn't it?
Yeah, up to 70 at one point.
So 70 per 1,000.
That's a lot, isn't it?
Which is quite a lot.
Less than 100 years ago, that's what you were facing.
Yeah. But that was in 1930, and you can see, well, there's a bit of a spike in the 40s.
Yeah.
I imagine
guess the war,
like maybe just stretched
Mm-hmm.
resources. But then it plummeted massively through to 2010. It goes up to, which it's down probably at, what's that going to be? You can't tell, 2 or 3.
Probably 1 or
maybe lower. Yeah. So it's definitely well under 10, isn't it? So.
And that's just massive infant mortality down to that degree. When you were, a 60-fold decrease in infant mortality is that's just stunning. You go from a time when you might expect that one of your siblings won't make it out of adulthood to that being just an absolute rarity.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you don't know how, in a sense, you don't know how good you've got it.
Right.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Right.
And we've got one more. Life expectancy.
Life expectancy, and this is for Latin America, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. So we're not talking about the West, not talking about Europe, North America, Australia. But again, Paul, for those listening at home, would you say the graphs are going up or down?
They've all gone up, haven't they? Since this is 1960 up to 2010.
Yeah.
So everyone's kind of grown, or got a longer age, life expectancy there.
Right.
So what have they gone up? Probably about 15 years each.
Yeah.
Maybe
50.
Maybe
Latin
a bit
America's
more for
gone
some.
from 55 to 75.
Yeah,
essentially.
actually, some have gone a little bit more. So on the whole, I mean, there's 1 or 2 blips there, but again, the trend is up, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So now there's many graphs that we didn't show. When you talk about a hockey stick graph, sometimes people talk about CO2 emissions, for instance. That's a hockey stick graph too, because massively since the Industrial Revolution, that's gone
Spiked.
through the roof. There are extinctions of animals, for instance. Again, that's gone up, and that's not a happy thing. Incarceration of people has been on the rise, especially in the United States. So there's all sorts of graphs that people say it's a mixed picture. And so someone like Steven Pinker comes and writes a book called The Better Angels of Our Nature and starts to talk about how there is human progress, people, and you would much rather live in 2018 than in 1918, wouldn't you? And you'd much rather that than live in 1718. No doubt about it. And so he makes those progress arguments, and then people come back on him and sort of say, well, there are other graphs that you could draw. What about the millions of babies killed in the womb, for instance? And that's absolutely true. But I think we do need to remind ourselves, especially when all the talk is of catastrophe, that actually we're living in such privileged times.
And I wonder whether it is that thing, isn't it? Because the questions are you hopeful about the world? Are you pessimistic about the world? And I think when we lose the sense of how well off we've had it, or we've got it, even the smallest decrease then feels like a step backwards. And I mean, you can see it in individuals. Someone who gets very used to living a particular lifestyle because they have a certain job with a certain income, and they use that income for that lifestyle, and things that previously that you had a job and you could live off of 20,000. When you started earning £45,000 a year, suddenly you found you couldn't live off anything less than £45,000 a year because you changed your lifestyle.
Right.
And then and then it seems like a disaster when you go down to £30,000.
Right. Downsizing seems just
Like-
impossible.
Yeah, like, well, that's the worst thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because what a step back in your status, you know. To,
yeah.
Um,
You know, downgrade your phone, your mobile phone package.
oh, no. Some people do.
Well, I
No,
do.
no.
I do, but it's almost this unthinkable thing. Of course, you upgrade.
But then
What else?
Yeah, but then I use that to make myself feel superior to other people. Because I'm like these idiots just paying for their monthly phone contracts, just
Yeah.
throwing their money down the toilet.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. But there's all sorts of things that we all do to
Oh, no,
upgrade our
absolutely.
lives.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So one thing we need to do is get a bigger sense of a further horizon on things, and as well when we're talking about are you hopeful about the world or are you pessimistic about the world. I often teach about sort of 3 views of history. There's 3 different ways that people tend to think about history. There's the circle, there's the frown, and there's the smile. I do it for people.
In case, for those who can't see, Glen is making the motion of a circle.
Like that. And then the frown. Glen's actually pulling a frowny face. You can probably hear that. Glen's speaking with a frowny face. And then a smiley face. And those are the 3 views of history. So a more Eastern view of history is the idea that it's just karma and
What goes around comes around.
samsara, the cycle of birth and rebirth. And that's and even within Buddhism that sort of says, hey, let's stop the cycle of birth and rebirth. I want to get off. Even then, your only hope of getting out of that is to dissolve into the ocean of being like a drop of water, and that's nirvana. So actually this view of history as like a cycle is really a view that nothing progresses, nothing really changes. It all just goes around and around, and therefore the clever move, if that's the way history is running, the clever move is to detach. So mindfulness, meditation,
Right, yeah.
don't get on this train. This train's not going anywhere. Why would you get on the train? Why
On the
would
ring road.
It's just a ring road.
Going nowhere.
It's going nowhere.
Yep.
So why don't you just, stop at the motorway
Pull over at the
services?
service station.
Pull over
Stop
the
at Cobham.
services.
Get yourself a Costa.
I highly recommend the hazelnut latte. And that's it. And you detach from the historical process. You don't want to throw yourself into it. And so that's one view of history that leads to one kind of engagement. But then if you think of the tragic view, Julius Caesar, for instance, he was the first person who began teaching that the day begins in night, So before then, we had the biblical view, and ancient cultures all shared that biblical view, that you begin with evening, and then there's the triumph of the light, right? It's a very hopeful view of the day. You begin at dusk, but then through the darkness, the light wins. That was the classical view of the
Right,
day
yeah.
until Julius Caesar, right? And he was like, well, that's not the way life works, right? You emerge from the darkness, you enjoy your brief moment in the sun, and then you plunge down into utter nihilism, right? That was
Cheery fella.
cheery fella, and he killed 1,000 Gauls and enslaved 1,000 more, because that's if you have that tragic view of life, the frowny face, the hill that you climb, then really you do want to engage with history, but you want to engage with history to win.
Yeah, to get the most whilst you're on that hump.
Right, and you
Yeah.
grasp and climb and scratch and take and kill and
Yeah.
get. And that's the tragic view of history that leads to a kind of engagement with history that is, okay, we're in a war and we're going to win, right? So that's the tragic view, and really it's a kind of a modern atheist view as well. This is
This is all there is, and
we've come from nothing, we're
just
headed
enjoy
nowhere.
it while you can.
Enjoy it while it lasts, right? And so that's the frowny face, that's the tragedy, and so you fight to win. But then the third view of history is kind of the Christian view, which is the smile, right? Though we do go through the darkness, we come out and the light wins. The light is stronger, and so. Again, as against the Eastern view, the Christian says, no, you can engage with history because it's heading somewhere, and it's worth trying to be in on what God is doing in this world, and it is heading towards justice. And so Martin Luther King Jr. said that famous line that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. So he's kind of doing the smiley face thing. The arc of history is long. And it was long, and certainly black people in the United States really knew about the depths and the darkness of slavery, and then discrimination and Jim Crow laws and all that.
Yeah.
But he had this Christian hope that the arc of history bends towards justice, and therefore he wanted to get on board with God's project and and engage with that process. And so that was how he wanted to engage with the world. And maybe with Brexit, there's a chance to go to 30,000 feet and just ask people, what is your view of history and why? You know, because the view that most often surfaces is the world's going to hell in a handbasket.
Sure.
But also, there is a kind of an optimism and a utopianism at times that sort of says we're on the right side of history. And but for both those things, you just want to ask, well, why? Why do you think positively? Why do you think negatively? And while in the West it's very popular to think that the arc of history is long and it bends towards justice, you don't have a right to say that without Jesus. Yeah. How do you know? Literally
no reason to think it's going to get any better.
Yeah.
It's the whole, the sun will come out tomorrow. You're like, well, not on your view, not necessarily.
Yeah, like, it'll explode tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one
That's
thing.
what you're aiming for, right? That's where we're going.
Yeah. So maybe on issues of hope, on issues of the future, you can get into fruitful conversations around those sorts of things. So those are the first two questions. Are you hopeful about the world, or are you pessimistic about the world? And then in our next clip, we're going to have a look at 3 more questions. Take it away, Paul. Question 3. Is politics important to you? It takes up the column inches of our newspapers and it floods our news channels, but how much does Westminster or Brussels affect us day to day? How much importance do we give to those power centres? I mean, who has the power?
If the right people don't have power, do you know what happens? The wrong people get it.
Is Westminster or Brussels really where power lies? It might be, but it's worth talking about.
Number 4. What are the personal effects for you?
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Just be curious. Maybe they have insights into the financial world, or imports and exports. Or maybe they're a farmer, or Northern Irish, or involved in fishing, or many other areas very closely connected to Brexit. You might be able to learn something on the ground about the issues, putting a face to the generalities we often speak in. But if there aren't any specifics, but only a generalised view, it might be worth pressing into that. What should we be concerned about day to day? What really matters? That brings us to
Question 5. What really matters to you in 2019 and beyond? Here, you want to get beyond the issue of Brexit. Start talking about the important things in your life. At a local level, family and neighbourhood and church and our everyday interests take up so much more of our time. And at an international level, the good news of Jesus is going forwards. The church, the largest sociological phenomenon the world has ever seen, is growing. You won't read about that in the newspapers. But the headlines don't always capture what's most important. So, those were 3 different questions. How important is politics in your life? How are you affected personally by these issues? And what really matters to you as you go forwards? So, what's your sense of where the rubber hits the road for people with Brexit, and how personally they are affected by it?
Yeah, good question. I mean, thinking about how important is politics in people's, in our lives. I mean, I was thinking, for me, I don't think to myself, I don't feel I'm particularly political. But then I was, realised that in the car or in the news, I'm often reading about the politics and thinking like, oh, this is important stuff, And so these, whatever goes on, whether it's Brexit or other things, these things will make a difference, who we elect and the decisions they make about, where they're going to spend money, and yada, yada, yada. And I kind of assumed for everybody was that clued up on what was going on.
Yeah.
But then, like the other day, in some other context, someone joked about, like, oh, we'll have a hard border or backstop. They were using it in something else context. Another person just didn't register. They were like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And we were like, the backstop.
Yeah.
Brexit, like Northern Ireland, hard border. And they were like, no. And I was just like, how can you have no idea what's going on? Like, literally, have you been living under a rock? Like,
I bet they were much happier, though.
Ignorance is bliss, I'm telling you. But, like, does it really affect people's lives, And I don't know whether it's going to affect me. That's the thing. I don't think anyone knows. So even though I think politics is important, because it does make a difference, I was thinking from day to day, do I really notice the things they do? You know,
Right.
do I notice the difference in my actual life?
Right.
But then for Brexit, they're saying that, you know, potentially people are stockpiling food and medicines and they were going to have lorries backed up down the motorway. And the reality is, I don't know whether that's going to happen. Of course, if it does happen and I go to the shop and suddenly I'm like, well, there's no food here,
Yeah.
then I might go, yeah, actually, this has had a bit of an effect, hasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or if I was sick, you know, I don't really get sick. I'm generally quite healthy.
Yeah.
Like Bruce Willis in Unbreakable. That's what I'm like. But I just don't get ill. But if I was someone who was dependent on drugs, you know, often
Yeah.
and regularly,
Yeah.
if it turns out that this will really screw up a supply chain, that'd be quite important, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
reality is, I don't think any of us know.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because, and we'll come on to it later about who do we trust. We just don't know.
Yeah.
Everyone says, "Oh, this is going to happen," and someone goes, "No, that's not going to happen. What a load of nonsense!" And
Yeah, yeah. Which is why it's important to ask about like how it will affect individuals, because if you're Northern Irish, it would have like a much deeper effect. If you're a Northern Irish farmer or a Northern Irish or any kind of fisher person, then it's gonna impact you if your whole business is imports and exports.
if you know, yes, potentially there's a lot of businesses who people spend time going abroad, and whether that will be an issue, you know, visas and travel, whether that will be hampered or more expensive, who knows?
Yeah, and there are a lot of people saying, well, it affects the poorest people in the country, and therefore, you know, Brexit is the immoral option. But actually, if you break down how people voted by income, those with less income voted more for Brexit. So that's a complicated one, but. It is just interesting the fact that our world is flooded with politics. Like, I think you could imagine a daily publication called a newspaper that did not cover was not taken up 75% with politics. I think you could imagine such a publication. like why the weighting of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
When actually, you know, what goes on in Google and Facebook is probably gonna like rule our lives
More so.
It could well
But
do.
it's the stuff that's just daily. So, you know, like why don't people put in the newspaper, you know, wow, so many years of peace.
Yes.
You know, this is brilliant.
Yes.
You know, things are great. You know, things are going well.
Yeah.
You know, it's the whole that's not a story. It's like, you know,
Yeah.
man walks
Yeah.
dog, you know,
Yeah.
dog
Yeah,
walks
exactly.
man type
Yeah.
thing. One's a story and one's really not, you
Yeah.
know, and that's what people go to the newspaper for.
You have a war correspondent, you don't have a peace correspondent. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose. Still peaceful here.
Yeah,
Like-
still peaceful. And hooray for that. And you don't get those graphs that we just showed where infant mortality rates are plummeting and life expectancy is going up. That's rarely headline news because it's
No.
incremental and it's an ongoing thing, and you don't really you don't notice the good that is happening, but you sure as heck notice when something's taken away from you. And also people talk about there's an evolutionary reason, so evolutionary psychologists sort of say, well, if you think about it, if our ancestors were not worried about extinction level events, then
They would have gone extinct.
They would have gone extinct,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, just naturally, biologically, we're kind of wired to overestimate the threat in the future. And therefore, you know, if it bleeds, it leads, right?
Yep.
Like on
Sure.
on newspapers and all that kind of stuff, and that actually things that are more threatening are going to trigger us and get us to be concerned and buy more newspapers. And there is an industry that's you know, it tips you towards fear, actually. But yeah, is politics that important in our lives? Yeah, it absolutely is. And people will always point you back to, well, you know, 1 Timothy says, you know, and 1 Peter, you know, tells you to pray for your rulers and all that kind of stuff.
And the authorities, you know, bear the sword as well, which, you know,
Right.
we're expecting our
Romans
government and law, you know, the people who make the laws to enforce laws and to bring
Yes.
about justice in our nations and
Yes.
whatnot. So
Yes, but it is just interesting that surely the biggest news story in the world should be that the greatest sociological phenomenon the world has ever seen, that's actually like transforming lives and crossing the globe and crossing every border is the church. And it's bigger today than it was yesterday, and it'll be bigger again tomorrow. And this is headline news in heaven.
Yeah.
It's not headline news here. But I think some of these questions, how important is politics in your life? How are you personally affected? What really matters to you going forwards? Is an opportunity to start getting to talk about, you know what, actually what matters is my family and my local community and this passion of mine. And it just gets people off the headline chasing. You know, I think I said on a previous livecast that I was on the train recently and there were two women talking, two professional women in their 20s. And one of them just said, "Oh, it's been a horrible year." And the other one said, "Oh, babes, why?" She said, "Was it something? Did something happen? Was it something personal that happened?" She said, "Oh, no, well, you know, first Alan Rickman died and then it was David Bowie." And she said, "Babes, that was 2016. To which her response was then, "Yeah, but there's probably been some people die this year too." I'm sitting next to trying not to burst out laughing.
And they were the MPs for which constituency?
But there can be a sense when you just follow the headlines. Like this woman had lived under headlines that were 2.5 years old.
Yeah.
About David Bowie. And that's why 2018
well, we're still
was a
talking
terrible
about Brexit.
year.
That's 2 years.
Yeah, that was 2016
2 years
as
old.
well. But it is just interesting how that steady diet of the media does change what we think is important.
If you, I mean, it's like just in a group of people, you know, if one person in the group, or it doesn't need to be just one, you know, is in the group is continually just saying how awful everything is, you're going to hit a point where you just feel like everything is awful.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
That person who just kind of sucks the life out of everything and you know, brings it down.
Right.
And if that's actually what the newspapers and the media do, if they're continually putting that message out there that this is what everything is like, the world is in news today, the world is still terrible.
Yeah.
You know,
which is why it's good to remind yourself of Philippians 2 that even back in his day, everyone was doing everything according to complaining and arguing, and that was the black backdrop. And so here's the calling as Christians: is to be people of hope and peace and joy, and then you'll shine like a star, you know, against that backdrop. So those are some more questions that you can ask, and then here are questions 6 and 7.
6 and 7. What's your view of politicians?
Can't you morons do anything right?
Yep, that's how we tend to see politicians. Briefly, we put politicians on a pedestal, but only for about 4.5 seconds. Then we want to bring them down.
Yes. We takes back control. Money, borders, laws, blue passports.
We think of politicians as liars and fools. Politics is just show business for ugly people, right? Well, where do we get those views from? Actually, all of us deep down want a ruler to make everything perfect. We expect our leaders to be a messiah figure. So of course they'll disappoint us. There's only one messiah who can meet our expectations. Which leads us to...
Question 7. Do you think you or I could do a better job?
I'd like to see you do better.
This is vital. Many of my Facebook friends think that they could solve Brexit when they can't even spell it. We can definitely have grievances with the way that many people have acted throughout this whole process, but it's important that we recognise that with every pointed finger, there are 3 fingers pointing straight back at us. In the Brexit omnishambles, we can see the problems with the whole human race, me included. But unfortunately, we don't tend to think like that. We tend to think that we're fine, it's the other guys that are the problem. So, how do you tend to think of politicians, Paul?
Well, you know, it's the classic, the phrase, isn't it? They say, how do you know when a politician's lying? You know, their lips are moving. That's what they say, don't they?
Yep.
And that's the kind of classic thing. I think, is particularly in the UK. I don't know how so much in the rest of the world, but
Australia's even more cynical.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. But we generally feel quite negatively about our politicians. You know, we think quite poorly of them, that they're opportunistic and out for themselves. And you know, I mean,
as though we're not, but
obviously not. But you know, I was saying earlier that, you know, we've been my wife and I have just started watching Designated Survivor on Netflix with I was going to say with Jack Bauer,
Kiefer
Sutherland, and he's this politician. He's become the president, and one of the guys describes him and says, here's someone who values service over ambition and integrity over expediency.
Okay.
And this idea, of course, that that's what politicians should be like, that they're there to serve people, and they should have integrity, not just doing the easy thing and whatnot. And I think often, though, we look at our politicians and we think that's not what they're like at all. We think they're out for themselves and whatnot. And I mean, we were talking, I was saying earlier that here we are in the middle of this shambles, this kind of shambolic affair that's going on. And it just seems bonkers to me that in the midst of that, someone like Boris Johnson can take a day out to do a photo shoot of himself running through fields of wheat to mock the Prime Minister. And you think, like, are you really going to use this kind of crisis we're in simply for your own personal gain to try and further yourself up the rungs of the ladder? And even people in the party. I mean, I'm whatever happens to Theresa May, you think, is this really the time to try and oust her and get up to the top yourself? That seems to be people self-serving rather than thinking about the country. Yeah.
So Benjamin Disraeli said that politics is about climbing the greasy pole. That's what it's all about. Climbing the greasy pole. But like, why would we hold them to that standard? Why would we ever think that our rulers should be servants? And I think in every other culture, you'd just be like, well, your rulers rule, right? Yeah. They don't serve. They rule. So why have we got this sense that actually our rulers should serve? It's actually really weird, And it's Jesus. Yeah. It's like in a word, the Son of Man did not come to. And interestingly, in the Old King James, in Mark 10 verse 45 in the Old King James, the Son of Man did not come to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life as a ransom for many. He did not come to be served, but to serve. And it's that word minister that means servant. Yeah. And we just take our cue from Jesus, who, in a sense, was the prime minister, right? Yep. He's the prime minister of heaven, and he's the chief servant. And he expresses his lordship by picking up the towel and washing his disciples' feet and pouring himself out to death, because he is the ruler who serves. And then Romans 13 says, your rulers ought to be ministers. And that just like totally shapes the way. It totally shapes what we expect from our leaders. Of course, our leaders don't deliver on it. But it's only Jesus that makes us even expect that from them. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, I think even if I guess people would agree that that's what we want, but people have a different view as to what that means as well. So I would say, and maybe this partly becomes from working in a church as well, that, so people always say about democracy, and they people mean different things when they say democracy, don't they? That some think, we elect these people and they are to do what we say, what the people say. Right. Hence, the referendum's a good example of that. The people have spoken. Now you put it into practice. And I'm not actually sure that's what I think democracy is, because my understanding is we elect people to do something on our behalf, and to make decisions for us. So in a sense, we sort of give them the responsibility to do it, which may mean that they make decisions that actually the people don't want. Yep. But it may well be that, so my doctor might make a decision about something that's to do with my health, and he knows a lot more about it than I do. Yeah. Now, there may be some some discrepancy between how much a doctor knows about medicine and how much a politician actually knows about Brexit and things. I'm not denying that. Yeah. But it is the case that we elect leaders to rule. Yeah.
With expertise and
hopefully so.
Yeah, Roger Marshall's made a great point. He says, when we accuse politicians and then the comeback is, well, you couldn't do better, could you? Roger Marshall says, yes, but when a surgeon botches an operation, we don't say to ourselves, well, I could have done better or I couldn't have done better. Politicians are trained, supposedly, in the kind of analysis and geopolitical diagnosis that most of us, supposedly, are not capable of. That's a good point. That you should not expect the entirety of the population to read the 600-page document that analyzes the withdrawal agreements, right? Yeah. That's why we have politicians who supposedly have expertise and time and can devote themselves to this.
Yeah, and whole teams
Right.
of people kind of saying like, you know,
Right.
this, yeah, you're right there, but actually there are these points here that make a difference and that we're just not aware of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, the reason I said maybe it comes from working in church is that, you know, I don't think church is a democracy.
No.
You know, so church is similar, that we put leaders in place
Yeah.
who are to lead us and make decisions for us, and
Yep.
you know, which is why, you know, I don't always think it's a great idea to be like, let's do votes in the church. I mean, you
Yeah.
elect your leaders to make the decisions, and
Yeah.
you know, I'm
Yeah.
sure there might be the thing every now and again, but
Yeah. Yeah. Democracy is not an unfettered good. It is something that we don't put democracy top of the tree of our hierarchy of values, because you know, I mean, to make democracy absolutely the number one power would be, well, we've got the technology these days to
Vote on everything. Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
you know, Brexit swipe left and Remain swipe right, and then, you know, you could have votes every single.
But you know what would happen though, because you'd be voting every day,
Yeah.
and people would be going, flipping heck,
Yeah.
like why can't they just make some decisions? Like, always asking me every day.
Yeah,
Whereas
yeah,
at the
yeah.
moment we're saying
The
all these
people's
people
vote.
can't program- Yeah,
I
exactly.
want the people's vote. Yeah. Well, do you? Yeah.
I prefer to grumble and complain.
Yeah.
You know, so,
And how many votes do you want? And so even if they could solve all the technology problems, because there's a technology problem about security, for instance, you know, you could hack elections much more easily if it was done via smartphone.
Yeah,
but
sure.
But even if you could do it, would it be a better set of affairs to actually just have everybody vote on everything? And that would be pure democracy, wouldn't it? And we all have the sense that no, actually, that there's problems there. That actually we want people who are representative, who also have expertise.
Yeah, and without and this is not at all a reference to Brexit, but like it is absolutely the case that just because a majority thinks something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
Right.
You know, and that's not at all a reference to Brexit in any way, shape, or form. But I mean,
yeah. No, it's obviously true.
you know, it's just the case that there are people who know more things about some
Yeah.
the average layman.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest, my understanding of how on earth the economy really works and the ins
Right.
and outs of things is pretty much zero.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
the difference things will make.
Yeah.
I don't
Even
know.
the way you framed that sentence, the difference things will make. I don't,
Yeah, exactly.
some things make some difference, and other things make a different kind of difference. I know that much. But
I'm a very simple money in, money out kind of person.
Yeah,
you know, that's
sure.
how it works for me. But
that's nice. That's nice. But so where do we get the idea that democracy is a good thing at all? Because you might just think, well, Winston Churchill said the best form of government would be dictatorship tempered by assassination. And he also said that democracy is the least bad form of government. Basically, it's the it's the worst form
still
of government
bad, you say, but
after all the others. You know, the others are the really bad ones. But why do we have this love of democracy? Well, the great statement that kind of undergirds a lot of democratic thinking is we want rule of the people, by the people, and for the people. Rule of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's great. But where did that phrase first appear in literature? And actually, it first appeared with John Wycliffe in the late 14th century as he was translating the Bible. In a preface to his New Testament translation, he just got into politics a little bit and sort of said, and because of Jesus, the rule of the country should be rule of the people, by the people, and for the people. And his reasoning was basically, well, Jesus, the man, our brother, is at the right hand of the Father, ruling the cosmos as one of us. And so he should model what kind of government we have. That it should be so that we should be represented in the highest places, and everybody should be represented in the highest places because humanity is represented in the throne room of God.
Yep.
So actually, democracy in that sense has deeply Christian roots. But obviously, Jesus doesn't, do votes on everything. And he kind of, though he does represent us and represent all of us, he does what he's going to do because he has certain expertise, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, there are times when democracy works, and there are times when, I guess, democracy just does not work. Yeah.
Bill Defeaty. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Democracy simply doesn't work.
There we go.
Did we hear that? Who knows if that
I
went
hope
out?
they heard it.
Yeah. Kent Brockman from The Simpsons saying, democracy just does not work, people. But, you know, we mentioned before how we have messianic expectations of our politicians. And I guess that's a problem. But, you know, I think you made the point in the video, you know, there's only one person who's fit, you know,
Fit to rule.
for that job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the government is on his shoulders, you know. So as we remember at Christmas, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, you know. Truly strong and stable government. Hey? Hey?
Boom.
Boom. See what I did? Shall we move on?
Yeah, we're running out of time, actually, because
Yeah.
we're 5-2 at the moment.
We'll
so
get there, we'll get there. So let's have a look at questions 8 and 9.
8 and 9. Go. 8. How do you think of the other side? The other guys are the problem, right?
She's the worst person I've ever met.
Brexiteers say it's Remainers. Remainers say it's Brexiteers. It's always the other side. This tribalism is described in the Bible from day one. We're brilliant at playing the blame game.
You know what I blame this on a breakdown of? Society.
It's easy to blame others, even to blame society. But again, you want to nudge the conversation towards a bigger view of human nature. I often mention the Alexander Solzhenitsyn quote, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." That brings us to question 9.
Can you put the other side's argument? In one sense, it's really easy to describe someone else's view.
You stupid bull.
But it's really hard to describe someone else's view in a way that they would recognise.
So you're saying you've done your research and women are unhappy dominating men?
I didn't say they were unhappy dominating men.
Maybe play a game with your friends. See if they can put the other person's point of view. It'll be a great exercise in transcending tribalism. Yes. Can you put the other side's view? Almost never. Can you? Almost, it's so, like, yeah, if you're on one side of a debate, it's so difficult not to caricature
Yeah, oh yeah, totally.
the other side.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's I suppose it's easy, and particularly at Brexit. That's exactly what goes on, isn't it?
Yeah.
You just demonise the other side because it's an easy thing to do, and because you assume that, of course, despite the fact we've just said we know that we don't know everything about these things, we're like, but we're probably right, and you're definitely wrong. So
That's right. Yeah, if you don't know the other person's argument at its strongest, you don't even know your own argument. You know, John Stuart Mill said something very similar to that. If you don't know, if you can't even formulate the other person's argument as strongly as it possibly can be formulated, you probably can't formulate your own argument because you don't know what you're up against.
Sure.
And I think with this one and the whole slide into tribalism, I think Christians have this unique resource called the gospel, called being saved by grace and not by works. I am not in the right because I get it right, you know, and yet so much of tribalism is just I've got my stuff right and the other side doesn't, and so if you're wrong, you're bad, and I can't be bad. I must be good, and so therefore I'm right, because we think of a kind of a righteousness by works, a righteousness by ideology and belonging to the right party, and all of us are seeking that sense of being in with the right group. And if that's your highest goal, then you must point the finger at others and say you're in the out group, you're wrong, you're evil. And so it's got to be, Christians should be modeling a kind of their salvation by grace by being the least tribalistic and the most open to be able to have friendships across the divides and that kind of stuff. I don't know how well we do at that, but we ought to be modeling the way forward. There was a lovely Facebook graphic on the eve of the vote back in 2016, and it was a husband and a wife kneeling down at communion, and he had a Remain t-shirt on, she had a Brexit t-shirt on, but they were holding hands at the communion rail, and it was just this, surely at the foot of the cross, you know, some of these tribal things can fall away.
Yeah.
Because it's not important that I get my politics right. I've been made right by Jesus. So hopefully that's one way of avoiding the tribalism. And then should we have a look at the final
Number
question?
10,
Question
quickly.
10.
Number 10. Who do you trust on this?
Information. You won't get it.
The trouble with Brexit is not just that I don't know what to think. I don't know who to trust. There are so many voices and they're all very loud. Who knows? And how do we know that we know?
And when it comes to establishing your worldview, I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like, what one specifically, I'm curious that you...
all of them.
This gets us into the question of faith directly. For me, I don't ultimately trust humans who have only a breath in their nostrils. But I do trust a guy who endured pretty incredible political upheaval. He was born under Roman rule. Some of his countrymen, like the tax collectors, were colluding with the Romans. Some of them, like the Zealots, were freedom fighters who wanted a violent exit from Rome. Jesus made both into disciples, both Matthew the tax collector and Simon the Zealot. And he got on with his world-changing ministry, largely apart from politics. Eventually politics caught up with him and he was crucified under Pontius Pilate. But God raised him from the dead to birth a kingdom that is spreading throughout the world and crossing every border. I don't know where history is headed in the short term, but ultimately, I trust him.
Well, what about you guys? Have you ever had... You don't need me. No. Yeah, so who do we trust? That's just a huge one, isn't it? You know, because you've got, you know, what Trump would call the mainstream media, right? And the lying media and all that kind of stuff. And every now and again, like you see the bias in the media, or, you know, it's always interesting when a journalist starts talking about an area that you know about, and you realize how little they know.
Yeah.
You know, they'll start pronouncing about Brexit, and you go, oh yeah, I'm sure they know what they're talking about. And then they'll start pronouncing about like some aspect of the Church of England or theology or, you know, Christianity in general, and you're like, oh wow, you don't even know the difference between an evangelical and an evangelist.
The most basic information.
Like, yeah,
absolutely.
And then you start to think, wait a minute, maybe when they're talking about that other stuff, they're just as ignorant. And the answer to that question is almost certainly yes.
Yeah.
But then other people come along and you get these conspiracy theorist bloggers, and, you know, like Alex Jones comes and talks about the lizard people taking over the world, and so you probably don't want to go
you probably want to go down that end so
that
much.
way, and you're like, who do you trust?
But I think that's what the lizard people want us to think.
So like, yeah, so who do you trust, and could you be wrong? And yeah, and I guess as a Christian you kind of go, I can be wrong, and I might well be wrong.
I think like one of the things I've thought about recently is you know, in conversation is maybe, and I've not really tried it, but whether it's helpful in conversation just to say to people, is it possible that this could be the case? So they think something else, but you say, could you conceive that it could be possible that actually this is the case? Yeah. And you say, you know, and if we can both find a place where we can say, right, yeah, we might, neither of us might have quite the full picture on this. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I just wary of like so much conversation, particularly on the internet, seems to just be people bashing heads. Yeah. And no one backs down one way or the other, and there's no common ground, and it's just you over there, you're the evil ones, and we must purge the unbelievers, and all this kind of stuff. And actually, maybe holding our hands up and saying, well, yeah. I believe this is the case, but I can't be sure. Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing with that is the big difficulty with Brexit. That I mean, it was interesting the other day when the Stephen Fry video came out. Right. Yeah. And people almost talked about it like, well, finally, the truth. And you're like, well, you know, I watched the video and I like Stephen Fry, and I don't think to myself that Stephen Fry is going to set out to deliberately mislead. Right. But it could still be a load of rubbish for all I know. Yeah. Like, I got no insight into the inner workings of it. You know, if he tells me that's how it works, then I'm going to look and go, I'm assuming that's how it works. Yeah, yeah. But then someone else might come along and say, oh, but he's not mentioned yada, yada, yada. Right. And I go, okay, well, I didn't know about that, so now what do I do? Right. There is an interesting hierarchy of experts there where Stephen Fry is top of the tree, isn't it? The comedy actor, Stephen Fry. Yeah. You know? Yeah.
But I think it's
and Beyonce will be come along soon. She'll have something to say. Beyonce on
she
Brexit.
Is top trumps.
Yeah.
She's totally top trumps. But it's this idea that, well, I think it is psychologically impossible to do what you're describing. To kind of, hey, for the sake of argument, I could leave my entrenched position and just, wander over no man's land and just, join you in your delusion, right? like that is psychologically impossible if your identity is based in being right, or your identity is based in a certain political group or a cause or a view of the world.
Yeah.
If you are in that thing, and if that is your identity, then you're not going to be able to cross the divide and think outside the box. You're really not. So so again, I think the gospel is absolutely core to that. That, fundamentally, I'm not an Australian, or I'm not an Australian living in the UK. And if you want to know how I voted, actually, on these whole issues, I very much am of the view that Australia should leave the Eurovision Song Contest.
We're all of that view, Glenn.
I don't know why
Get
Australia are there. But if let's say I'm an entrenched Brexiteer or an entrenched Remainer or anything, I really need to do some deep work on, Jesus is Lord, and that's my identity. And I could flip-flop on this issue. I could wake up tomorrow and find myself in a different place politically, but find myself absolutely secure spiritually.
Well, I mean, and actually, so I would say I would have described myself as, generally more, left.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last 18 months...
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of more right stuff.
Yeah, the YouTube algorithms
have thrown these things to me.
Yeah.
And I kind of go, oh, okay, there's some really sensible stuff here.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, of course, I like to think of myself as a centrist, because I'm the balanced one.
Yeah.
Not like you leftist and rightist.
Yeah.
I've got it absolutely right.
Right.
Keeping the balance.
See, I'm not even on the spectrum. I'm a libertarian, so I'm just above you guys, looking down from on high.
But what do you say to the person then who says, yes, I agree with you, but aren't you just like that as a Christian? That you're so entrenched in your position that you won't give up any...
Right.
You won't even look at the reality.
Right. Of the Christian versus non-Christian debate.
Yeah, I mean, this is coming
intramural.
Coming out of Brexit, but just people would say but you're saying my identity might be as an atheist, and I'm so entrenched in that I won't come out of it. But you're just as entrenched as a Christian. What do we say?
I think, well, step one, you just say, okay, that is reality. That actually you are committed to things first and foremost, and you're not a rational decision maker who is above it all, just assessing the evidence, because nobody is like that. But then you've got to admit that everyone is viewing the world from somewhere, and you can't view the evidence from nowhere. There is no neutral position to take.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that at that point, it's then about what are the foundations that allow you to make sense of the world best, and I think as best as I can try and put the spectacles of certain kinds of atheism on. As best I can put the spectacles of Islam on for a minute and look around at the world and. But I do happen to think that as C.S. Lewis said, I believe in the sun not just because I see it, but because by it I see everything else.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus is the light of the world that illumines everything else. But it is impossible to get out of a position. Everyone looks at the world from somewhere. But I think and this is one thing that recommends Christianity above all other things, is that he gives me an identity that is not based on my performance. It's not based on my flesh. It's not based on my works. It's not based on my ideology. It's based outside of myself in him. And so if my identity is in him, he gives me the best shot at looking at the world from a position that's not about entrenched kind of privilege and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, interesting stuff to think about.
Yeah.
So
let's hope that Theresa May has been watching, because we'll have pretty much solved most things, I imagine. That's the back of that. She'll have come to an epiphany, and the whole government really will sure be watching this on their lunch break, and they can get back to work.
Absolutely.
If that golden staff has been put back.
Oh yeah, the golden staff.
We didn't get the video, sadly. I don't know if anyone saw the Member of Parliament, Labour MP, picking up the magic golden staff from the middle of Parliament as a protest, which I didn't even know there was a magic staff.
You didn't know that? That's when the Queen comes in and they knock on the door.
Yeah, well, now you say that, I do, but I didn't realise it was there, and they can't pass any laws unless it's there.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
Good job they're getting that sovereignty back. We can't do anything. Can't do anything unless the magic rod's here. The inanimate carbon rod. Like. Dear me. Right.
You know, a bit of decorum, Paul. You need these things. Democracy's, based on such things. Last thing to do. Oh, let me have a check. We've been running a competition on this little nifty number. It's not little at all.
Let's cut to Glen. There it is.
Dun, 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 dun. Look at this. Isn't this brilliant? Haven't 10 of those done a fantastic job? Reading between the lines.
Look at that. That's a chunky tome as well there.
Love thy neighbour, it says. There we go.
You get your money's worth on that.
You do get your money's worth. There's about 120,000 words in there.
I was going to say 120 pounds. I say you don't get your money's worth if that's the case.
No, I think in terms of pound per word, this is the best value of all my books.
Wow.
Get onto 10ofthose.com and you've sorted Christmas. Hey?
Yeah.
And you get 25% off if you get a box of 10. Get free shipping. You get a free ebook with every copy sold. Mm-hmm. And if you get a box of 10, 25% off, and you've sorted Christmas for everybody.
Brilliant.
Right?
And that lasts a whole year.
And it lasts, this one lasts 6 months.
Oh.
6 months. And then volume 2 is coming out early in the new year.
There we go.
There we go. So let's have a look. We did a competition so that people could get copies. And here we go. Now, what am I going to do? I'm going to... What's a random number generator? Here we go. Random number generator.
7.
Between... No, not you. We're going to use technology. Okay, here we go, people. Here's my random number generator.
Hang on, let me put you up so people can see.
Between 1 and 11. Here we go. It's going live. And random number generator. Number 3.
No, it was 3. I can confirm.
Who was
our independent adjudicator tonight?
The third person is Rachel Sloan. Rachel Sloan has just won.
The speedboat. No. She's 40 miles from the sea. Yeah. It's the Speak Life checkbook and pen.
So, fantastic. Rachel Sloan, you win this. We'll send out a copy. And hey, everybody else, you could get your own. Just come on. Come on. Baby needs new shoes.
Yeah,
so,
Glen needs Christmas. Yeah, pay for Christmas. So.
Yeah, it's not just Christmas for you. It's Christmas for me. So get on and get reading between the lines in your Christmas stockings.
Yeah. Well, it's almost 2:15.
Okay, so it's time to stop. Just stop.
Please stop. Oh dear.
Awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks very much for watching, everybody. We hope it's been helpful. And we're in next week, aren't we?
We're in next week. So, yep. Shove this out on social media and share the podcast, which comes out on Friday. And
have good Brexit conversations.
That's right.
Cool. Take care.
See ya.
Bye.